So, Jadav, co-founder and COO, Gameon. Let's hear a big round of applause for him. Come on, audience, you can do better. Let's hear a big round. Please, thank you. And joining this panel, who's already on the dais, given up a big round of applause for Mr. Krish Anurag, Managing Partner, Chimera Venture Capital. Let's give up a big round of applause for him. On that note, I'll hand over the session to our moderator. Thank you.
Check. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you to this panel on unlocking investment opportunities in gaming. I would like to introduce my panelists first. We have SPV, Saikat. Saikat, the head of strategy and M&A for Nazara, sitting here with a 1,000 million war chest for acquisitions, has been making news for the last 1 year, acquiring companies left, right, and center. We have Krish, who is the managing partner for Chimera Venture Capital, a young and very interesting person overall, has had multiple exits, had companies that he's founded, and now wants to help the gaming ecosystem grow. Then we have Kaustubh here, who is a COO of Mumbai Gullies. Mumbai Gullies is the game that they're making. It is an action RPG that is set in Mumbai, and you play as a Mumbaiker trying to, finish tasks, take over the underworld, right? That's the game. So we'll start off with asking Saikat on how he is looking at the gaming industry right now. He's evaluating a lot of companies as targets for acquiring investments. Are there any trends? What are you looking at? How do you want to utilize the war chest? Anything on that?
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. So gaming is at a very interesting stage where a lot of the old methodologies around game development, investments, and everything is sort of taking its own pivot. We are quite excited because it continues to show the innovation and drive towards newer and emerging areas, starting from UGC to VR to newer trends and models, even around the mobile free-to-play, the traditional models, or the PC premium or console premium models, etc. So I think it's a very, very interesting and unique time that we all are currently in. And we believe going forward, it's gonna break free from its shackles once more, as gaming has continued to do so over the last 20, 30, 40 years. And we will see new emergence and new resurgence with new kind of players coming into the picture. So we are quite excited about it. Coming to a small correction here, so we don't have $1,000 million of war chest. We have close to about $200 million of war chest. But we have been quite active in the market. We have made a bunch of acquisitions over the last year, 20 acquisitions to be accurate across the group. We have acquired some very phenomenal studios who we are continuing to remain bullish about it. I think at the end of the day, you talk about future, right? I would want to take a step back and talk about the past, because what worked historically will continue to work. The models may change, the mechanics may change, the modus operandi may change, but the core thesis, the genre expertise, the disciplined approach of game development, everything else will sort of remain the same. Newer tools will get added, including generative AI, which will further streamline the process. But overall, I think it's a very exciting time that we are into the gaming ecosystem.
Got it. Krish, want to like your perspective from an investment point of view. What do you see as trends? What works? And where do you see this going?
So, hey everybody. I think one thing that we're finding really interesting is new ways of monetizing games. So for us, we've taken a really deep interest into gaming commerce because we find that ads are a model that is starting to become harder and harder to use, and in-app purchases, especially in developing countries, are really hard to drive. So new areas of monetization around one really interesting place would be gift cards, and I think new monetization in gaming is something that we are finding really interesting and taking a deep thesis in. And I think a lot of the hybrid casual gaming that's coming in the section of adding meta progression to the casual layers is something we're finding really interesting. Seeing a lot of companies in India coming up on that level as well. To say the short session time playability, which people love, can play at any time, and adding a progression layer on top of that is something that we're finding really interesting as well on the studio side.
Got it. From someone who's been on the other side of the table, what do you see as the trends? How do you approach investors, and how do you see things moving forward in the gaming industry?
So there are multiple trends at any point in time in any industry. As a founder, you need to be specific on what you're comfortable with, what your strengths are. Like a founder who has been building in PC console should primarily look at that market because it is an easier product for them to build. Maybe like in market in India, the investor approach is very mobile first. So whenever you're building in India, the approach is that if you're building to save time and get to market faster, you need to play or create games accordance with the playbooks that investors have set out. So you have capital access that you can experiment around with. In context of what trends are growing, it's very different. Like free to play is going strong and it'll keep growing strong. As Krish mentioned, that alternate monetization is where everybody's looking at, first thing. Second, I have seen a very interesting class grow out, like Sajid Sir's report came in Indus Valley. We are looking at India One. We are seeing that a lot of people are opting to buy luxury vehicles. So Maruti 800 Alto sales are going down, but mid-sector Creta and sub-luxury products are coming out. So that is happening same. Consoles are getting sold. Games with premium are being sold, but this fragment of user is quite small. So that fragment, if it goes around and grows over a period of time, that is a trend I think in India will look at. More premium game users or players will coming up. Yeah.
Got it. Thanks for your inputs, everyone. I'd like to move to how you evaluate opportunities. All three of you are, in some way managing a fund and have a war chest, not as big as Nazara though, but you do have a war chest. So I wanted to understand, what do you look at when you're evaluating ventures? Is there something of a playbook that you have, something that you would like to see in companies?
So I think the most important thing is the founder, right? Especially we're an early stage fund, so for us it's really just founder and vision, right? And one thing is, you don't just have to have a phenomenal founder and a phenomenal vision, but how well does the founder and his skill set fit the vision that he's trying to make? And most of the time the founder's interests will align with what he's trying to build, but it's not just about the interest and the passion for the project, but also does his personal skill sets align with what he's building?
So I would like to start with the framework first, because I think it's very essential to understand who you are pitching to, and based on that, their frameworks will sort of change. So for a strategic like Nazara, it is very important for us that the company has grown to a certain level. They are profitable, they are operationally very stable, very smooth, and we see growth opportunities and growth levers that we as Nazara can bring onto the table and sort of grow the company. The other set of investors, where Krish and his universe sort of evolves from, looks at a very founder-driven, very early stage, taking a bet on the founder, bet on the product, bet on the idea, bet on the target markets, etc. These are the kind of areas that typically people from VCs would be looking at. There are other sets of investments, right? I mean, in order for you to build a business, you do not need to rely on an investor, but there are other sets of investors available in the market as well, including banks, which is very traditional loan-based products, which would look at your serviceability, right? So that's the least talked about, but still a relevant one. And then you have private equity players, which would rely on, again, this debt serviceability and debt model, etc., to sort of fund your company and startup. The one least talked about investor class is the angel investor. It is least talked about because they are unorganized, and almost anybody in this room can be an angel investor. So if you are a founder who is building his company from ground up, it is almost easier to raise the first check from an angel investor, because you can create your own angels. You don't have to rely on the existing set of angel investors. You probably would meet with a lot of people, your school teachers, your professors, your parents, your relatives, your immediate supervisor, maybe in your current organization, who has seen you work, who has seen your commitment and passion. He could be an angel as well. So you could create your own angel. So it depends on the class of investor you are looking at. the thesis will differ, the kind of things that they would be looking at in a business differs. So it is very important for you as a founder to sort of understand who you are reaching out to, what are their motivations, and what is the game that they are playing, and understand whether you are a fit for that model or not. So for a strategic, if you're not profitable, you may not be a fit. I mean, I'm not saying you aren't, but you may not be a fit. But for a VC, if you're not a very high scalable or a high growth model, you may not be a fit. So depends on the kind of investors you're approaching to.
Kaustubh, before you answer this question, I'd like to add one more point, one more angle of reflection where you can help. Is what were the most questions that you got when you were raising funds for Gameon? Is there a recurring theme in those questions?
Yeah, so when we were building, or we are building right now, like the game we are building for PC console, primarily the question was who will buy in India first? Are the talent pool available to build a game like this in India? And if it is, why haven't been a similar game being built before this, or why isn't being attempted by somebody who happens to be a bigger player? So answers for this lies in, like, there's something called as innovator's dilemma. So there's this book with the same name. It caters to one thing, that when a company has a larger audience group that they're catering to, they won't look at an upcoming market per se. That's where a smaller player takes on. The classic example of it is IBM versus Apple. Going for a frame, like the computer that IBM built versus the PC that Apple built. Similarly, the newer set of innovation is always going to come in from smaller set of players, because their risk appetite, because they have nothing to lose in comparison with bigger company which has a reputation, which has user class, which also has the employees on part that go forward to. So these were question sets to which certain answers match, but the questions are like, is it possible? And if it is possible, why isn't have been attempted? That was a common sense of question. In terms of framework for investing, I look at gaming investment, like when I look from investing angle, there are like technical risk or there is market risk. Gaming hardly is going to be technical risk. Technical risk projects are going to have higher gestation period, but gaming projects which are market risk also happen to have higher gestation period. The game we are building it since 2022, being a large game with a lot of capital being involved. It does not I'd say fit in a bracket of venture capital because it's not a technical risk, it's a market risk. Since you're taking more time to put your money or get to the market, and even after that the chances of failure are much higher than success. So instantly it happens, not all gaming companies are venture fundable. So you need to understand, is your product venture fundable? Is it approached right way? Or you are just building a game and you're looking for money that needs to come in from a publisher? In that angle, as Saikat said, FNF, friends and family, to build out a vertical slice goes out in the right way, and then approaching a publisher. The first question is, do you need funding? If you need it, then what kind of funding do you need? Do you need it from like publisher, or do you need it from venture capital? But I think 80 to 90% of gaming businesses are not VC fundable.
Got it. I have a follow-up question, Kaustubh. You are making a game in a space where everyone says India is a mobile gaming country, right? How did you manage to tackle that problem? You are making a game mainly for PC, right? Is it also consoles?
Consoles is like an upgradation. Like they need to accept us. It's like getting into.
Got it. So how do you pitch a product that is a PC game when in a mobile-heavy country?
So we might be having a theme that is Indian, but our primary target group doesn't happen to be India. So after developing a vertical slice, we went around testing it with users in context of the business angle as well as the play angle, and we realized that the product might be of Indian taste, but it is not for Indian audience, because if we are going to do that, we won't recover the money that has been deployed in making of the game, which won't be fair to our set of investors. So we can't do fan servicing all the time. We have to build a product that is economically viable. So we realized that the product is built in India, which is supported by the cost arbitrage that we have here. So development cost is comparatively low, but it needs to be initially distributed in the Western markets, and then we can bring it back to India.
From that, let's move on to some success stories. Krish, you've had some exits. You've had, companies that have IPO'd. Have you? No. So, can you tell us some success stories? What was the secret recipe of those companies that you had an exit?
My success stories are not on the gaming side. So I'm only 18. So I started this fund about 6 months back. So we haven't had the success stories here. We're still in the initial deployment phase. I've had a few success stories on my own personal angel investing, and one of the few interesting commonalities between all these success stories is that these founders just had a certain type of kind of energy and ambition that surrounded them. When they would speak about what they were doing, you couldn't help yourself but get excited about what they were talking about. And gaming is one of the most passionate founders that are out there, and I think that's the really phenomenal thing about the space, because the founders love what they're building, and that kind of commonality is there. But I think with gaming it's really interesting because it's a very new market, and a lot of the founders that are trying to figure it out may be building things for a market that's not there purely out of their passion. And we've seen founders that have had phenomenal products that are building things out of their own interests that may not have done well on the business side, and we've passed on these guys because it's not VC investable, and it doesn't mean it doesn't make sense for them to do it, because it aligns really well with their own passion. And like Saikat said, there's certain types of investors you go to for these types of projects. But on the VC side, what we've seen on our success stories is we've had a lot of success on the infrastructure side of businesses, and on the studios going for low gestation periods, so building their games faster, being able to ship it out quicker, which gives us our metrics back faster, which gives us the ability to evaluate whether we want to deploy a follow-on check, or even have some metrics before we even write our first check, which makes it really interesting for us as a VC. But I think certain sectors make it really tough to kind of align our interests and our risk profile with the companies that early.
Before you say anything, I really like the way he put in his age into the conversation, made us look like really, really old.
Right, Saikat, moving on to you. You mentioned that you were, Nazara looks at, say, set businesses with a certain size. This is a word that's very much thrown into the stock market where they say there is a moat around the business. Is that something that you look at? And what, in your terms, defines this moat in this gaming industry?
So the businesses that we acquire typically have a very solid core, and by core I mean a very boring, repeatable operations which can be scaled infinite times to create enormous wealth creation for everybody who's involved in the process. This is one of the core things that we look at when we are acquiring or investing in any entity or any setup that we are looking at or exploring. What we typically do is we bring in our own expertise, our own ancillary and support services, and our own years and years of understanding and learnings through multiple businesses that Nitish has built over the last 26 years, and scale them up from their existing level to the next level. One bit of a subtext which is slightly off track but important to know, that at every stage of growth your challenges would be very different. So from 0 to 1 it's a very different challenge that you're trying to solve for. From 1 to 10 it's a very different challenge. From 10 to 100 it's a very different challenge. As a strategic, we focus on either 1 to 10 or 10 to 100 sort of a challenge, and we sort of take it and we grow the companies. And that's where our sort of experience helps in growing those companies. So that's exactly what we look at in these businesses. That's exactly the reason why, if you look at our businesses overall, so we own Sportskeeda, which is the number 6 website in the US, competing with stalwarts like Fox Sports, ESPN, and other larger broadcasters. It's a very solid, very repeatable, very operational heavy core that the team has, and how do we then go ahead and scale it. Nordwin similarly owns 80% plus of India's esports events space, and they've pivoted away from esports to now look at larger, entertainment properties like Comic-Con and other areas. So that's exactly what we look at, and that's exactly what we'd be continuing to focus on.
Do you also see the market moving towards a certain type of consolidation? You leading it in India?
I mean, creative fields are always ripe for consolidation. At some stage when, look at what's happening with gambling space in the US. As soon as the regulation is sort of lifted on, the regulations are now in place, so the markets are more regulated now instead of operating through black markets. A lot of consolidation has happened initially, and now newer players are emerging with newer concepts like sweepstakes, for example. So this is the constant cycle of who generates value from what sort of activities, and how do they value and where do they see their fit in that overall ecosystem, will continue to drive. Gaming, for instance, as Krish mentioned and as Kaustubh mentioned also with his innovator's dilemma concept, is that I think people at grassroots will continue to do amazing and phenomenal work when it comes to pushing the envelope of how things are being thought, why is it being thought, and they will continue to generate a lot of value. There are many examples in my 5, 6, 7 years of gaming industry experience. I've come across hyper casual, I've come across IDFA and how people are challenging that IDFA. So there are, every 6 to 8 months there is a major pivot that happens in gaming, and people always find solutions to those. So we are very confident that that cycle will continue. Of course consolidation will happen, but it will not stall the growth of the industry. It will sort of enhance the overall ecosystem, because more money means those founders who are operationally very strong have now a lot of cash in their hand, who will then continue to invest either through venture capitals or through private equity investors or by themselves as angels, and they will continue to drive that innovation. So we don't see that as a problem at all.
Got it. So this is a question mostly for Kaustubh, but feel free to chime in if you have any thoughts. You did mention that is it an investable business, right? So how important is timing in all of this?
So the problem is very interesting. Music, movies, art specifically, or games transcend the boundaries of countries because they work on core human behavior. There's a loop to an action. A guy sitting in India, a guy sitting maybe in South Africa, a guy sitting maybe in America will work on core behavior cycle. But the consumer cycles or consumer behavior is very different. In that aspect of time, where that particular consumer market is operating defines everything. You are building a PC game for US market, maybe, and taking a very independent approach and going via Steam, you will do really great. But you're doing same approach in India, a fragment of which consumer behavior has not changed, won't do good. So the cycles of the market are constantly different. You need to focus on initial stage at micro markets instead of markets, and focus on what are the trends there and then go around it. So at any point in time, there is a scope for every business to work out, but you need to identify where that market lies.
Also, one of the big things that we have a thesis on at Chimera is gaming at the end of the day is a user perspective driven business. What the user perspective is what will drive the business. So like what Kaustubh said, the user perspective is always changing, and in different geographies in the world, the user perspective will be different, right? So for example, in India, the user perspective is relatively mobile driven. It is more ease of access, shorter session time. In places like Japan, it's relatively similar. In US, it's a lot more PC driven. Even though there is a massive mobile market there, the PC elements are much larger. People want more AA and AAA titles to come from there. So it's about timing what you are launching, not just to the area and the time, but also the geography and the type of users.
So you do not, I mean, look, India has had many billionaires who haven't raised a single penny in venture capital, private equity or otherwise. Almost all early businesses in India, starting from steel to salt to whatever you can classify, they were not built. So essentially, in order for you to build a business, you do not need a venture capital or any other investor to come in and help you. Now, the question is, they built it over the last 50, 60, 70 years. The only question that you as a founder need to be asking is, can someone come in my business who could help me achieve and go there in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years maybe. That's a stretch, but 5 years, 10 years. So I think that's where you need to classify yourself, and you need to also understand what are they looking for. If they were to get an exit and build a massively successful business in 10 years, what are they going to be looking at? And this is purely from a venture sort of a thesis. So coming back to the original question, a lot of these businesses do not fall under this massive hockey stick growth sort of a curve. But they can still be good businesses. You can still have a very profitable, very good gaming business, which eventually could be picked up by a strategic or a private equity player, depending on how you are able to scale it and what is their interest. So the larger point which I reflected earlier back, few minutes back, was you need to understand the framework with which all of these investors are thinking on, and how do you present an idea, tweak an idea, pivot to an idea, or maybe grow your business to that level so as to suit their investment thesis. And that's where you would see a lot of people saying you're not venture investable. That's what it essentially means.
But the priority of this product changes when you hit a black swan event. Okay, so we have had 2 black swan events in last decade. First of being launch of Jio, which subsidized internet, and second was the COVID. So a lot of business which did not seem like hockey curve, they had a projection that hockey curve for a while, and they got loads of investment from venture capital that helped them build in projects on side on. So I feel that those things or those events cannot be taken away, because cyclically one or the other events is supposedly going to happen, which is not under our control, but there's a probability when we work or dwell in the digital businesses altogether. Like the US regulation might have hold of the gambling thing.
On the black swan events, people have been building on VR great businesses, small businesses, but great businesses for the last 8 years. VR has never really picked up. It's now in a position where it's in a very good niche, where you can still grow. If you look at free-to-play, the emergence of free-to-play, people were building mobile games way before free-to-play ever came onto mobile. People were building games for mobile way before iOS App Store and Android Play Store came in. So I think these evolutions will continue to happen. You can continue to build what you're more passionate about, and that's what is essential. You can take advantage of some of these events and actually propel your growth, which is exactly what Zynga did in its early free-to-play days, and with Farmville and a couple of other games that they had, with what Rovio did basically, which created enormous wealth for them over the years. So you can utilize some of these major industry pivots, but still you are passionate about what you're building, and that's why you are building it. But if an opportunity arises, then of course some businesses which are not venture investable earlier could then start to make sense.
And I think with venture investability, a lot of times big trends that emerge cause a lot of VCs to get really excited and have the kind of, hey, I don't want to miss out on this big thing that's coming up, right? And when these black swan events happen, a lot of VCs get really, really quick to write a lot of checks in companies that are starting to take off because of that fear of missing out on a new big trend, right? I mean, with RMG, the moment one big RMG company happened, the amount of VCs that adopted RMG into their thesis was phenomenal. And because of that, a lot of RMG companies on the early stage that were not venture investable before very quickly became venture investable. Their valuations automatically drove higher. So I think, just to add to that, when these black swan events happen, an entirely new subset of investors open up to you, but that time period can be limited, right? People can lose that hype and interest really quickly.
Got it. So you're saying investor FOMO basically happens.
It does, yeah.
Got it.
If they're sustained, they won't. I mean, if the trends are sustaining, like a free-to-play, they don't lose interest.
So it can be lost, right? So I mean, with a lot of areas that happen with the black swan events, a lot of times these black swan events cause massive interests, and then they get lost because a lot of this hype is not sustainable hype, but very, very quickly generated and lost. If the hype ends up generating value out of it, then they get sustained, capital gets increased, but majority of the time that doesn't end up happening.
Got it. Fair point. I think that was a very well put point, Krish. I want to ask if the audience had any questions, or yes, we have one question there.
Hi everyone, myself Karthik, and thanks for the session. It was really good. And I have two questions. The first question is now the investments, all the parts looks like a product, looking for a product. So if, as a India, the biggest consuming country, number wise, so still we couldn't able to make a very like a very well warmed, welcomed product from India, like a mobile game or PC game. Still we are struggling to do it. So, okay, this is not my question. The question is, I was in the part of industry for last 15 years. I was working in mobile games and in AAA games. I was a technical artist. So, when we looking for investing on the technology improvements, so like new youngsters are coming on the funding side. So, for example, if the company looking for creating the technology supports for all the games, okay. So, maybe we are lacking on that part. So is it that there is a space for the investments, not for the product, to happening for the technological developments? So most of the technology skills we are consuming from the all over the world, and we're trying to understand, learn, and we do it. And at the time they have a delivering the product in a very high level quality. We're trying to chase it out. So there we are actually lacking. So consumers are not very broad now. So that's my first question. The second question is to try to understand from the investor side. If we want to create a company for a supporting technology, and to understand the business point of view, and what will be the large scale or for a revenue model. So from maybe you can guide us. You can set up an idea like this is what we're looking for. If this points are clicked, then we can able to invest on this. So maybe this is what I feel required right now. Please go. It's thanks. Like you can answer for this. Thank you so much.
So two questions, right? So on the I may lose track of the second question, but let me try and do justice to it. On the technology side, I'm pretty sure there are investors, although we have not traditionally not done technology investments or mid-layer sort of an investment. Our investments are mostly consumer focused, but there are investors who do investments into the tools suite and other service providers, not service providers, but more on the subscription and other side of the things. So you will find these investors. You need to understand who these investors are, how do they approach, and things like that. So I think that would be helpful. The other option could be you could already partner with existing complementary set of services or tools. You can create your own investor classes even if there exists none. And if there is value, I'm pretty sure you will be able to convince someone to sort of invest. On the what was your second question again? Could you just give me 2 words? Like,
it's about if I have a company, right now. I was like morely concentrating on the technical improvements.
Understood. Dev tool. So look, the reason why people may not choose, or the bar to entry for any investment from a criteria perspective would be higher, is because the scale potential is less. Imagine it from how much are you going to charge, how are you going to do those sales, so what would be the per head cost, how many companies are you going to sell, how many heads are you going to onboard per company. So all of those questions becomes then relevant. On the B2C side, of course, if you're building a product, the audience is wide and large, so even if the average order value or ARPPU is sort of less per user, it's still a massively sizable market. But every enterprise solution company that you have come across, which are doing like proper tooling and SaaS-based model, they would have something which is irreplaceable. Something like an SAP or a Salesforce, right? I mean, they are irreplaceable now in the companies where they are implemented. You cannot get away from these services. So they essentially in some way sense give you so much value. So one is the value angle, the second is the scale angle. I think these are the 2 areas that are extremely important.
Yeah, I agree that point. Actually, that's the answer we get every time we go for the funding. We're looking for a technological company, but that's what the gap, right? That how the gap should be filled, because when the technology person should not be when looking for the funding and all these aspects, they look more into technology.
Do your sales. Sales is your best way to fund that company.
Yeah.
Focus on sales, sell to as many clients, as many people as possible, raise money, and then it's your wish whether you want to develop the company more or you want to enjoy your holidays in Bahamas.
Thanks so much.
I think my question is around the VR gaming segment. My name is Sai. I'm a XR consultant. Consult a few companies on the XR space. So especially, I think this year, like Google coming out with their Android XR, and kind of like there are like major moves happening in the VR space. So how are the VCs seeing this opportunity, and especially with Nazara and other investors here? I think you guys are looking into investing into VR companies, right? I want to understand what are the key metrics that you're looking at, especially with this opportunity.
from a Nazara lens?
Nazara lens and probably other viewpoints as well.
I think with VC, being an early stage VC, we don't have the largest first check size. And a lot of the VR space has a lot of high budget stuff, which kind of eliminates that for us, being a small VC. I think a lot of the technology that's coming behind VC is really interesting. We do infra companies, so we like the infrastructure side and the dev tools around VR. From India, we don't believe in high budget dev tools, so building the sickness from VR, which we find really interesting. And those kind of pockets of niche value creators within VR is really interesting. But I think the large-scale hardware stuff or the really, really detailed developer stuff like Unity, it doesn't really have an India story around it.
So for us, VR is interesting because as a company, we are focused more on IP creation, and VR gives a very important and interesting touch point for us. Our core thesis is within gaming also, anything that makes gaming more accessible, either from a development standpoint or from a usability standpoint, for a player consumption standpoint, are gonna pick up. It's a matter of when, not a why. In that aspect, we think that VR is gonna be a very important area going forward, and it's gonna be a growth area and sustained growth area for the coming years. The problem with VR today is that the number of sets are limited, and it's not growing at a pace where it makes a lot of VCs interested to invest, because the scale potential again hits a ceiling. For a strategic, it presents us a very interesting approach and an interesting opportunity to be present across multiple touch points, and we can find our own niche and we can find our own profitable operating area till the point it sort of kicks off. And we are very bullish on VR going forward. I think some of the growth areas that will come in VR going forward is, of course, the rise of new competitors, which will each compete head-on-head for prices, for features and other things, which will make the devices more accessible for users in general, which will give massive inflow of new devices that are in the market available. The second is VR native audiences growing up and have the spending power or consumption power, either of the two, which will increase the size of the market going forward. So I think, yeah, VR is a very interesting space. Even now, I think VR on the industrial simulation training side is quite big. It's already quite big. Gaming, it has not picked up, but it will for sure.
I think on a follow-up on that, especially say example the hardware accessibility standpoint, if it the hardware is accessible under 10,000 rupees or something, or like $100 and below, does that change the VC mindset, or like does that get them excited, or like any investor standpoint, not VC? Just to add up on that.
Yeah, I think definitely, right? So with the price point that VR is at now, it limits the potential audience, which limits the total scale that you can reach, right? Especially in places like India, at the price point that VC is now, it becomes almost inaccessible to majority of the potential audience base who love gaming in this country, and it's a massive country, and there's a concept of sub 20k rupees. Once you get sub 20k, people don't think, they just tap the card, right? So if VR can get accessible, also lightweight, because the weight issue in VR is, I think, a big thing when it comes to gaming and sustained gaming, because people don't want to feel sick and have a heavy thing sitting on them. So accessibility, lightweight, and price point are probably the three things that would turn VR on the hardware side to more venture investable.
Sure, of course, for us as strategics, I think it will, for any investors for that matter, it will be interesting bet, because you now have opportunity to have multiple studios or a very high profitable or high growth studio within your portfolio, and that's something which will be interesting for us as well as strategics.
If you guess to track the VR timelines, when VR actually came in, Google Cardboard, it was almost free. Okay, it was part of content and the delta that was supposed to be delivered at a price point where the devices have lacked. Okay, so you have to have a delta in terms of regular media consumption. If I'm going to use cardboard and the device is at 15 to 18,000 rupees and the experience is going to same, it does not make sense. If the device is at 10, 12,000, 15,000 max, but the delta should be bigger enough for a user to buy the product first. The content library should be vast enough for the user to retry and constantly use the product, maybe like have a frequency of using it at least a week. It's not just one thing, it is an array of things that need to be ticked off. It's like first creating a hardware, then creating a sandbox for the content library of it. So like creating a content sandbox, creating a dev tool sandbox, as well as open platforms for hardware, so that multiple hardwares can come in and there's the competition on layer of two. So that, like, it's a lot of bigger problem than it looks.
Right, do we have any other questions? Or we'll end the session here. All right. I'd like to thank the panelists for taking out the time, for sharing their expertise. Thank you for all the insights.
Come on, ladies and gentlemen, let's give up a big round of applause. Thank you so much, esteemed panelists, for that incredibly valuable discussion on funding and scaling gaming businesses. A huge thank you for all of you for being right here and sharing your valuable insights with all of us. Come on, ladies and gentlemen, let's give up yet another big round of applause for them.